Welcome to The Adventure of the Whispering God, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, The Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1892. For many years the world believed my friend Sherlock Holmes to be dead. It was only recently, within a hidden compartment of his old travel trunk, that I discovered the truth of that great hiatus. His secret journals, penned in a cipher so complex that I required Mycroft's aid to unravel them, chronicle his astonishing journey through the enigmatic East. These are those tales of logic meeting ancient mysticism. The first of these extraordinary accounts takes us to the sacred mountains of Tibet, a matter of political sabotage and supposed miracles. I present to you The Adventure of the Whispering God, Chapter 1. Among the many strange annals of my friend Sherlock Holmes's career, none is more singular than the affair he would later refer to as the Whispering God. He recounted the tale to me one fog-bound evening long after his return to Baker Street, and the details remain etched in my memory. It was during his time in the East, when the world believed him dead and he travelled under the guise of a Norwegian explorer named Sigerson, that he found himself in the high, thin air of the Himalayas, within the ancient stone walls of Gada Monastery. The wind, a constant and mournful presence at that altitude, sang a keen song around the monastery's eaves. It was a sound that usually brought peace to Khempo Rinpoche, the monastery's abbot, but on this day, it seemed only to echo the disquiet in his soul. He stood by the window of his Spartan chamber, gazing at the colossal peaks that tore at the sky. For generations this place had been a sanctuary of profound silence, broken only by the murmur of prayer and the rhythmic clang of the great prayer wheel. And now a new sound had entered their lives, a voice. It was, the devout claimed, the voice of the Bodhisattva itself, emanating from the ancient gilded statue in the main hall. A miracle. But its pronouncements were far from divine comfort. They spoke of betrayal, of foreign vipers in their midst, and of the folly of the peace treaty being negotiated with the British Raj. The monks, once placid, now gathered in agitated clusters, their whispers rustling through the corridors like dry leaves. The political balance of the entire frontier, delicate and precarious, was beginning to tremble. The abbot turned from the window, his saffron robes making a soft, deliberate hiss against the stone floor. He was a man whose age was impossible to guess. His face was a map of serene wrinkles, but his eyes held the sharp, clear light of enduring intellect. He had spent a lifetime contemplating the mysteries of the spirit, yet the problem before him felt disturbingly terrestrial. He poured a cup of butter tea, the liquid's aroma filling the sparse room. The tremors he felt were not in the earth, but in the hearts of his people. Faith, he knew, was a powerful current. It could illuminate the soul, but it could also be diverted to grind the stones of war. The prophecies were too specific, too politically convenient, to be dismissed as mere spiritual phenomena. They aligned too perfectly with the ambitions of those who wished to see the British treaty fail. A decision settled upon him, as quiet and final as the mountain snows. Logic had its place even here, at the roof of the world. There was a man residing among them, a guest who had arrived months ago, with letters of introduction, and a mind as sharp and cold as a shard of winter ice. The explorer, Sigerson. He was an eccentric, a man who spent his days studying lichens and his nights observing the stars, a man who saw the world not as a tapestry of faith but as a grand and intricate puzzle. Khempo Rinpoche set down his cup with a faint click that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. He needed a mind that could follow a thread of evidence through a maze of devotion without breaking it, a man who could look upon a miracle and search for the string puller. With a final, steadying breath that mingled with the scent of incense, he moved towards the door, his soft-soled boots making no sound. He would seek the counsel of the strange man from the west. He would ask Sigerson to look upon their whispering God. We were led through a narrow corridor, the air thick with the scent of melted yak butter, and ancient parchment. The only sound was the soft shuffle of our boots upon the stone flags and the low, persistent moan of the wind that haunted these high mountain passes. The monk who guided us stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with dark, oiled iron, and pushed it open with a respectful bow. A wave of dry, incense-laden warmth met us as we stepped inside. Khempo Rinpoche's chambers were a place of profound stillness. A single butter lamp cast long, dancing shadows upon walls lined with countless scrolls, its flame fluttering with a faint, almost inaudible hiss. The abbot himself sat upon a low cushion, his maroon robes pooled around him. He gestured for us to be seated, his movements slow and deliberate, betraying a weight far greater than his years. His voice was low, yet it filled the quiet room, a sound like stones smoothed by a river. Sigerson, Doctor, thank you for coming. I have a matter for which worldly wisdom is required, for I fear my own is insufficient, replied Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes, who had adopted the name Sigerson for his travels, inclined his head. His sharp, angular features were thrown into stark relief by the flickering lamplight, his eyes alert and piercing. You are troubled, Rinpoche. It is not merely in your words, but in the tension of your hands. You have clasped them so tightly that your knuckles are white. This is more than a simple quandary, explained Sherlock Holmes. The abbot gave a slight, weary smile and relaxed his grip. He looked from Holmes to me, as if measuring our capacity for understanding. You see everything, he said, his voice dropping to a graver tone. It concerns the statue of our protector, Chen Rezig. For 2 months it has spoken. It whispers prophecies, warnings, that are turning my people against the treaty with your countrymen, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. Spoken. I could not help but interject, my voice betraying a profound astonishment. A statue of mere stone? Dr. John Watson inquired. The whispers are heard by only one, he continued, his gaze steady. Anila Dolma, an elder nun whose piety is as solid as the mountain itself. She has spent 60 years in devotion. She interprets the sounds, and her faith is such that no one, not even I, can doubt her sincerity. She believes she is the vessel for a divine voice, Khempo Rinpoche answered. Holmes leaned forward, his customary languor replaced by a predatory stillness. The game, as he would say, was afoot. And these prophecies, what is their nature? Are they vague or specific? Sherlock Holmes responded. They speak of betrayal, of a foreign shadow that will poison our lands if we sign this treaty. They have grown more urgent, more direct. The younger monks are inflamed, and there is talk of taking up arms to defend our frontiers. This voice is pushing us to the very brink of war. Khempo Rinpoche replied. The gravity of his words settled in the small room. Outside, the wind howled a mournful chorus. This was no simple case of fraud. It was a matter of international stability, balanced on the faith of a single old woman, and the whispers from a stone god. His voice trembled slightly as he made his plea. I do not ask you to prove this a miracle or a deception in a way that will be proclaimed from the rooftops. I ask you to find the truth for me, so that I may guide my people away from this precipice. But you must do so without shattering the heart of this community, without destroying a faith that is more precious than life itself. Can such a thing be done? Said Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed upon the single, sputtering flame of the lamp. The air seemed to crackle with the intensity of his thought. When he finally spoke, his voice, though quiet, resonated with an absolute and unwavering resolve. The challenge is not in discovering the mechanism, Rinpoche. The true problem is to navigate the consequence. I accept your commission. I must observe this phenomenon for myself, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Khempo Rinpoche led me not through the grand sunlit courtyards, but down a narrow, winding passage carved from the mountain itself. The air grew colder with every step, and the distant, rhythmic drone of chanted prayers faded behind us, replaced by the soft slap of our felt boots upon the stone. A profound sense of antiquity permeated the place, as if we were descending into the very heart of this ancient faith. The passage opened into the oracle's chamber, a circular room whose domed ceiling was lost in shadow. The air was thick and cloying, heavy with the sharp resinous scent of burning juniper, and the fainter, oily smell of melting yak butter from 100 tiny lamps. Their collective light cast a wavering, uncertain glow upon the stone walls and the faces of the 24 monks already assembled, their maroon robes blending into the gloom. At the chamber's centre, upon a stone plinth, sat the idol, a fearsome, multi-limbed deity, whose gilded face was a mask of serene fury. The chamber fell silent as a new figure entered. It was Anila Dolma, a woman whose age was etched upon her face like a sacred text, her back bent with devotion. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, taking her place on a cushion before the idol. As she knelt, the last murmurs faded into a profound silence, broken only by the soft hiss and sputter of the lamps, a sound that seemed to amplify the chamber's emptiness. Then it began, a sound unlike any I had ever heard, a dry, sibilant whisper that seemed to slither through the air, coiling around the pillars and echoing from the unseen dome above. It was a chilling, serpentine hiss, punctuated by low, resonant hums that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. Anila Dolma's head was cocked, her eyes closed in fierce concentration. For a long minute she was utterly still. Then, her own voice rose, thin, but imbued with a startling power. The whispering God speaks. It warns of the iron hand in the velvet glove. The treaty offered by the men from the Western Sea is a chain forged in deceit. They offer peace with one hand while the other sharpens a sword for our throats. Reject them, replied Anila Dolma. A collective gasp swept through the assembled monks, a sound that the curved stone walls caught and magnified into a roar of fear and wonder. I glanced at Holmes, who stood beside me in the guise of the explorer Sigerson. His eyes were not fixed upon the oracle or her idol. Instead, his keen gaze was directed upwards, tracing the dark arc of the ceiling with an intensity that bespoke not reverence, but pure analytical focus. Later, as we walked back through the now empty corridors, the distant chant of evening prayers a low thrum against the stone, Holmes finally spoke, his voice a low, precise murmur. The sound is a fraud, Rinpoche. A most ingenious one, I grant you, but a fraud nonetheless, Sherlock Holmes said. The old abbot's steps did not falter, yet his shoulders tensed beneath his robes. You are certain, Sigerson La? The effect upon my brethren was palpable, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. Perfectly. The sibilance, that distinct hissing quality, it does not possess the resonance of stone or the timbre of a human throat. It is the sound of air forced through a narrow, metallic aperture. Furthermore, its point of origin is not the statue's mouth. The echo is deliberately manipulated. The primary sound emanates from that high fissure near the ceiling, cleverly disguised by shadow. The chamber itself is the instrument, and someone, my dear Rinpoche, is playing it, observed Sherlock Holmes. The old Lama stopped, turning to face Holmes. His face, illuminated by a passing torch, hardened with grim understanding. That section of the chamber, it was recently surveyed. For structural integrity, I was told. Only one outsider has had unrestricted access there in the past month, answered Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes's eyes glittered with a familiar light, the quiet excitement of a puzzle beginning to yield its secrets. And his name, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He is a cartographer, a man of science in the employ of the Tsar, an Indian gentleman named Nirav Singh, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. The echoes of the oracle's pronouncement still seemed to cling to the air as Holmes, in his guise as the explorer Sigerson, followed Khempo Rinpoche from the chamber. Their footsteps hushed. The scent of juniper smoke gave way to the dry, papery fragrance of ancient knowledge as they entered the monastery's great library. Here the only sounds were the soft whisper of turning pages, and the distant, rhythmic drone of monks at their prayers, a sound which seemed to be the very heartbeat of the mountain. Scrolls were stacked to the rafters, their ancient wisdom palpable, and the low light from butter lamps cast long, dancing shadows upon the stone floor. A man stood near a large table upon which a half-finished map was unrolled, his back to them. He was not a monk but was dressed in practical, European-style travelling clothes. At their approach he turned, a pair of calipers in his hand, and a welcoming smile on his face. His voice was a low, calm murmur. "Sigerson, permit me to introduce our guest, Mr. Nirav Singh. He is a cartographer, charting these remote territories for the government of the Tsar," Khempo Rinpoche replied. Singh bowed, a gesture that was more Western than Eastern. He was a handsome man, with intelligent eyes and an accent that spoke of an education at Oxford or Cambridge. His English was flawless, his tone smooth and self-assured. "A pleasure, Mr. Sigerson. It is a rare thing to meet a fellow man of science in this elevated wilderness." "I map the earth. What is it that you explore?" responded Nirav Singh. Holmes offered a simple nod, his voice deliberately neutral. "The customs of men, Mr. Singh. They are a landscape all their own," explained Sherlock Holmes. For a time, the conversation remained upon neutral ground. The challenges of altitude, the complexities of triangulation, the shared solitude of their work. Holmes, as he later recounted to me, found the man to be charming, witty, and possessed of a formidable intellect. It was only when two young monks approached Singh with a question about a place name that the atmosphere itself seemed to change. The scrape of their sandals on the stone was the only sound. As Singh unrolled a different section of his map, his movements suddenly imbued with a new, more deliberate purpose. His voice took on a more solicitous quality, one of academic concern. "Ah, the treaty line. Yes. Tell me, from your perspective, does this border seem equitable? The British are given control of the high passes, I see. A significant military advantage, should disagreements arise. Is that a widely held concern?" replied Nirav Singh. The monks exchanged a troubled glance, their silence a potent reply. Singh pressed on, his tone still one of pure inquiry. "My historical atlases speak of a time before the Gorkha Wars, when your people's influence reached much farther south. It must be difficult to reconcile modern maps with historical memory. Such grievances, if left to fester, can poison the well of diplomacy, can they not?" He rolled the map with a decisive snap of parchment that echoed in the quiet library. The monks bowed and retreated, their faces clouded with a doubt that had not been there moments before. Holmes watched them go, his expression unreadable. Once they were alone again with the Rinpoche, Holmes's voice became sharp and low, cutting through the tranquil atmosphere. "That man is no mere cartographer. He is an agitator," explained Sherlock Holmes. "You are certain?" remarked Khempo Rinpoche. "Observe his method. He does not state opinions. He poses questions. He couches political poison in the language of geographical fact and historical sympathy. He is not drawing lines on a map. He is drawing lines of battle in the minds of your young men. He is the voice of Russia, seeking to turn this place against Britain," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Khempo Rinpoche's serene expression tightened, the lines around his eyes deepening not with age, but with a sudden, grim comprehension. He gave Holmes a slow, deliberate nod. A deep, unspoken understanding passed between the two men. The whispers from the statue were a tool, and Holmes now felt with chilling certainty that he had just met the man who wielded it. The motive was clear: to sabotage the treaty by stoking the very fears the oracle appeared to confirm. But the method remained a mystery, he concluded, his gaze turning towards the corridor that led to the oracle's chamber. A man may plant a seed of dissent, but he requires fertile ground for it to grow. The true deception lies not with the cartographer, but with the chamber itself. I must examine it. Alone, and in the dark, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Later, as we sat by a brazier that did little to fend off the mountain chill, Holmes recounted the details of his solitary investigation. The memory of Nirav Singh's calculated words had propelled him to action. He could not permit a night to pass without stripping the mystery from the so-called Whispering God. He described gaining access to the oracle's chamber, the great doors groaning shut behind him, the sound swallowed by a profound silence. The air was heavy, with old stone, and burnt yak butter from the lamps. Their low flames threw his shadow, a gaunt and dancing giant, against the curved walls. The statue itself was a looming presence in the gloom. Holmes approached with the quiet tread of a cat, his footsteps a faint whisper on the polished floor. He held his lamp aloft, its flickering light glinting on the cold bronze of the deity's impassive face. He began his examination not as a worshipper, but as a surgeon. His long, nimble fingers probed and traced every surface. He later told me his thoughts came to him in a low murmur, a habit he employed when his mind was entirely consumed by a problem. "Flawless," he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the stillness. "The casting is masterful. There are no seams, no hidden plates, no hollow cavities that might conceal a speaking tube or phonographic device. The mouth is but a line of moulded bronze, as deaf and dumb as the stone it sits upon," stated Sherlock Holmes. He tapped a finger against the idol's chest. The resulting sound was not the resonant ring of a hollow vessel, but a dull, solid thud, quickly muffled. He moved to the ornate pedestal, running his hands along its base, and testing each carved lotus petal for a hidden switch. He found nothing but solid, unyielding stone. The statue was exactly what it appeared to be, a masterfully wrought, but entirely inert, piece of metal. Frustration. A rare visitor to my friend might have claimed a lesser man. For Holmes, it was merely a signal to alter his line of inquiry. If the secret was not in the object, it must be in the environment containing it. He straightened and paced to the chamber's center, his eyes no longer on the god, but on the architecture of its temple. The walls were not flat but curved inwards, rising to a high domed ceiling. It was a design he recognized from the principles of acoustics. He spoke a single word into the air, his voice at a conversational level. "England." The effect, he said, was astonishing. The word did not simply echo. It traveled up the curved walls, gathering force in the dome above, before descending with uncanny precision upon the statue. His own voice, spoken from the chamber's center, returned to him as though whispered from the idol's lips. The room itself was a grand acoustic funnel, designed to collect and focus sound upon a single point. So he breathed, the realization dawning with absolute certainty. The miracle is one of architecture, not divinity. The voice does not come from the statue, but is merely delivered by it. The deception is elegant, but it requires an operator, a source for the sound, stated Sherlock Holmes. His theory was complete, yet it lacked its most crucial component, the human agent. The contrivance was explained, but the conspirator remained a ghost. Convinced the answer lay not in the heavens but on the earth beneath his feet, he lowered his gaze from the magnificent dome. Armed with this new understanding, his keen eyes began a slow, methodical sweep of the flagstones upon which the oracle rested. Holmes later recounted that solitary morning with the precision of a man reliving a pivotal discovery. His vigil had confirmed the chamber's unique acoustics, yet the source of the sound remained a maddening enigma. The statue was silent, the walls solid stone. No contrivance presented itself. Frustration, a sentiment he rarely permitted, had begun to set in. He stood alone in the oracle's chamber, the air still and cold, tasting of incense and ancient stone. The profound silence was a presence in itself, broken only by the soft scuff of his boots as he paced before the impassive idol. Refusing to be defeated, he resolved to re-examine the scene, not for what was present, but for what was out of place. He was fond of saying that the detective's true work begins in the observation of trifles. With this principle as his guide, he knelt on the cold flagstones, his keen eyes scanning the floor at the base of the statue's dais. The flickering light of a single butter lamp cast long, dancing shadows, making the task all the more difficult. For several minutes, nothing rewarded his search. Then, as he shifted, the low angle of the lamplight caught something otherwise invisible, a faint, almost spectral shimmer on the stone, a delicate coating of particles that did not belong. He leaned closer, holding his breath. It was a dust of a most peculiar nature, darker than common, with a granular texture that held a dull metallic luster in the light. It lay concentrated in a fine, perfect arc, before the statue's pedestal. Not the dust of ages. This is fresh. This is the detritus of machinery, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Here, at last, was the crack in the supernatural facade. Miracles do not shed metallic filings. Prophecies do not leave the remnants of friction and mechanics. This was not the residue of a god, but the spore of an engineer. A wave of intellectual satisfaction washed over him. The pure, cold thrill of the hunt. The phantom had finally left a footprint. With utmost care he produced a folded paper from an inner pocket of his coat. Using the edge of a thin knife, he gently scraped some of the fine powder onto it. The sound was a faint, dry whisper against the stone, the only noise in the cavernous space. He folded the packet with nimble fingers, securing his first piece of tangible evidence. It was a small thing, a mere pinch of dust, yet to Holmes it was more precious than gold. He rose, the small packet held securely in his palm. The mystery was far from solved, but he had dragged it from the realm of the supernatural into the world of the material. The question was no longer divine, but entirely human. His mind turned to the men within the monastery walls. Who possessed the necessary skill, the opportunity? His thoughts settled on one man in particular, the cartographer, Nirav Singh, a man of science and maps, who understood the physical world far better than the spiritual. The following afternoon found us in the great central courtyard, a vast expanse of beaten earth and stone, under a sky of the most piercing blue. A sharp, dry wind, carrying the scent of distant pines and dust, whipped the corners of prayer flags, causing them to snap and flutter with a sound like a flock of startled birds. It tugged at our cloaks, a constant, restless presence. My friend, still cloaked in the identity of the Norwegian explorer Sigerson, had the small leather pouch containing the metallic dust secured within his coat. His gaze, however, was not on his discovery, but upon the figure of Nirav Singh, the cartographer, who was taking measurements near the monastery's western wall. Singh was a man whose precision was evident in his every movement. He worked with an air of detached scientific confidence that seemed almost alien in this place of profound faith. It was a stark contrast to the quiet devotion of the monks, a clinical intrusion into a world of spirit. I felt a subtle tension in the air as we approached, the crunch of our boots on the gravelly earth announcing our presence. He looked up, his expression unreadable. His voice, adopting the slightly formal cadence of Sigerson, was affable. "Mr. Singh, a fascinating geological panorama you have for a workplace. These mountains must present 1,000 challenges to a man of your profession," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Singh straightened up, a faint, superior smile touching his lips. He spoke with the crisp enunciation of an Oxford don. "Indeed, Mr. Sigerson. The stratification is unlike anything in the European Alps." "A constant battle between map and mountain," responded Nirav Singh. Holmes nodded, his eyes sweeping over the towering peaks that encircled us, their snowy caps brilliant against the azure. For a moment, only the whistle of the wind filled the silence. He seemed the very picture of a curious traveller, yet I knew that behind this placid facade, his mind was racing, arranging the pieces of this extraordinary puzzle. "I have heard it said," he began, his tone one of casual inquiry, "that the unique mineral composition of these rocks can produce the most peculiar acoustic phenomena." "Have your studies lent any credence to such tales?" Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I felt a familiar thrill, a sense of the game being afoot even here, at the roof of the world. I saw at once the direction of his attack. It was a masterful gambit, presented not as an accusation, but as a shared scientific curiosity. Singh's guard, if he had one, visibly lowered. He gave a short, confident laugh. "Ah, you refer to the god, whispering god, no doubt. The monks see a miracle. I, however, see geology. It is not so uncommon. The region is prone to minor, deep earth tremors, far too slight to be felt. These vibrations travel through specific strata of rock, those rich in crystalline quartz, and are focused by the natural curvature of the cliffs. The statue, being carved from a particularly resonant lodestone, acts as a natural amplifier. A simple matter of geophysics," replied Nirav Singh. The explanation was so complete, so utterly plausible, that I felt the tension in my own shoulders ease. I found myself nodding in agreement, a sense of relief washing over me. It accounted for everything. Yet when I glanced at Holmes, I saw a familiar stillness settle upon his features, a subtle hardening of his grey eyes that told me he was anything but convinced. He offered no immediate reply, allowing Singh's words to hang in the crisp air. The air between us grew taut once more. "A remarkable theory, sir." "Truly remarkable," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "And these tremors, being a natural process, would of course be entirely unpredictable in their timing and intensity, would they not? Haphazard, as is the way of the earth," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He replied with a brisk nod, clearly believing he had satisfied my friend's curiosity. "Precisely. As random as the wind itself. Now, if you will excuse me, this light will not last forever," responded Nirav Singh. With another curt nod, the cartographer returned to his instruments, his back a picture of scientific detachment. We walked away in silence, the sharp mountain wind now seeming to whisper a new, more urgent message in my ears. Only when we were well out of earshot, beyond the reach of any casual glance, did I turn to my companion. "Well, Holmes, that seems to settle it rather neatly." "A natural phenomenon after all," responded Dr. John Watson. He stopped so abruptly I almost walked past him. He looked at me, and in the harsh mountain light I saw a flicker of grim amusement in his eyes. He reached into his coat, and I heard the faint crinkle of the leather pouch as his fingers brushed against it. His voice dropped to a low, intense whisper that cut through the mountain air. "On the contrary, Watson, Mr. Singh has just confirmed my suspicions. His explanation was too perfect, too complete. He has provided a textbook theory to explain away a miracle. But he has overlooked one thing. Nature is chaotic. This voice is not. And nature does not, as a rule, leave a fine residue of machine metal filings. Let us see what this honest dust has to tell us," Sherlock Holmes noted. Though I was many thousands of miles away in London, Holmes later recounted the events of those solitary days of investigation with such precision that I feel as if I were there in his cold stone quarters. He had retreated from the life of the monastery, becoming once more the pure engine of reason I knew so well. Upon a rough-hewn table sat his travelling microscope and a single slide of glass, on which lay a minute sample of the dust he had carefully collected from the base of the oracle statue. After an hour of silent, motionless scrutiny, he straightened up, the scrape of his wooden stool, a sudden intrusion in the profound quiet. He took a pinch of the grey powder between his fingers and, with a thoughtful frown, drew it across a piece of slate. The sound, he told me, was a faint, high-pitched screech, utterly alien to the grinding of stone on stone. "Not grit. It is metal. Finely shaved ferrous filings, the unmistakable spore of a modern drill bit. A hole has been bored. Of that there can be no doubt," Sherlock Holmes noted. His mind, now set upon a definite track, worked with furious speed. For the next hour he paced the confines of his small room, his soft boots making almost no sound on the worn floorboards. Outside the wind began to rise, whistling a mournful tune through the eaves, and causing the prayer flags to snap and flutter with a sound like a flock of frantic birds. It was this very sound that gave birth to his first great and ultimately flawed hypothesis. Of course, it is an Aeolian device, a colossal harp, built not of wood and gut, but of mountain and wire, replied Sherlock Holmes. His voice, as he recounted this moment of false epiphany, still burned with the memory of intellectual fire. He laid out the theory for me, that the saboteur had drilled into a natural fissure in the rock behind the chamber, stringing wires of varying tensions across the gap. The mountain winds funneled through this channel would cause the wires to vibrate, creating a resonant hum that could be directed towards the statue. It was brilliant. It was elegant. And it accounted perfectly for the metallic dust. For 3 days the explorer Sigerson was a man possessed by the weather. He sat for hours on the bluffs, his notebook in hand, charting the velocity and direction of every gust. The scratch of his pen in the ledger was the only sound in his quarters for long stretches, a lonely counterpoint to the howling gales outside. He correlated his findings with the precise times Anila Dolma reported hearing the sacred hum. The theory held, but on the 4th morning it collapsed. I recall Holmes describing the profound, crystalline stillness of that dawn. The air was motionless. Not a single thread on the great prayer mast stirred. It was a silence so complete, one could hear the distant clank of a yak's bell from the valley below. Yet, precisely at the hour of morning meditation, a young monk came to him, his face pale, to report that the god had whispered once more, "No wind. Not a breath. The harp cannot sing without its player, and the player is absent. The deduction is false," observed Sherlock Holmes. He confessed that he sat for a full hour, staring at the floor, the edifice of his logic lying in ruins around him. The very foundation of his theory had been swept away. And it was then, in the depths of his frustration, that his gaze fell upon that same unyielding foundation. He tapped his heel against a thick flagstone. A dull, solid thud answered him, a sound that seemed to be absorbed by the very earth, and if not through the air? If the sound is not carried by the wind from above, then by God it must be transmitted through the very stone from below, explained Sherlock Holmes. In that instant the entire puzzle reconfigured itself in his mind. The problem was not one of acoustics in the open air, but of vibrations through a solid medium. His quarry was not in the wind-swept crags of the mountain, but somewhere, in the hidden depths beneath the monastery itself. Holmes, later recounting the events that followed his abrupt change of theory, spoke with the familiar thrill of a hunt renewed. He found the old lama meditating in his sparse, high-windowed chamber. A single butter lamp cast long, dancing shadows upon the walls, and the only sound was the low moan of the wind pressing against the ancient stone. The wind was a misdirection, Rinpoche. A phantom I chased to my own frustration. The answer is not in the air. It is beneath our very feet, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paced before the seated figure, his lanky frame a stark silhouette against the flickering light. Rinpoche's eyes, deep-set and placid, followed him without surprise, merely with a profound and patient attention. The earth itself speaks, Sigerson La. Or a man makes it seem so. Khempo Rinpoche replied, a man, most certainly. The stone of this mountain is the true instrument, the floor of the oracle's chamber its sounding board. Consider a tuning fork struck and placed upon a tabletop. The entire surface vibrates, amplifying the note. The metallic filings I found were not from some wind harp, but from the drilling needed to seat a device deep within the rock below, declared Sherlock Holmes. The logic, as always, was impeccable. Once stated, it reframed every fact, turning a baffling enigma into a problem of engineering and access. Rinpoche gave a slow, deliberate nod, his expression unchanging. "You believe the voice travels through the rock, from a chamber below," said Khempo Rinpoche. "I am certain of it." We have been searching the heavens when we should have been exploring the depths. Tell me, are there any plans of this monastery's foundation? An architect's draft, however ancient," replied Sherlock Holmes. For the first time, a flicker of something new crossed the Lama's face. Not surprise, but memory. He rose without a word, the soft shuffle of his robes the only sound in the room. From a heavy, dark wood chest, he produced a long cylinder of worn leather. With immense care, he unrolled it upon a low table. A faint, dry crackle accompanied the movement, and as it unrolled, the air filled with the scent of dust and aged parchment. It was a magnificent blueprint, drawn with a patient, calligraphic hand. Holmes leaned over it, his keen eyes tracing the intricate lines of the monastery's structure. He pointed a long finger at the section directly beneath the oracle's chamber. There. A storage cellar, just as one might expect. It provides a simple and direct explanation, explained Sherlock Holmes. But as he spoke, his finger stilled, then began to trace a fainter line, a passage that branched away from the main cellar. His breath drew in with a sharp hiss of discovery. His finger followed another, and then another, revealing not a simple room but an entire forgotten network. Good heavens, it is not a cellar, it is a warren. A honeycomb of forgotten meditation cells and utility tunnels. Our saboteur has not one hiding place, but a dozen. He stood back, his face a mask of intense calculation. The problem had just grown exponentially more complex. Khempo Rinpoche gazed at the map, his own finger now settling upon the entrance to the largest, most accessible of the rooms below. This main cellar is known. It is where the cartographer, Mr. Singh, is permitted to store his instruments to protect them from the cold. Khempo Rinpoche answered. The ancient monastery blueprint lay spread across the low table, its delicate fibers illuminated by the unsteady glow of a single butter lamp. The air in Khempo Rinpoche's chambers was thin and cold, carrying the faint, sweet scent of incense and old parchment. Holmes, whom I still knew only as Sigerson, leaned over the diagram, his long, thin finger tracing a route through the labyrinthine passages depicted beneath us. This larger space here, directly beneath the oracle's chamber. It is marked as a general cellar. Who has access? Sherlock Holmes noted. Khempo Rinpoche, seated in quiet contemplation, did not hesitate. The soft rustle of his robes was the only sound for a moment. His voice was a low, calm murmur. The cartographer, Nirav Singh. He was granted its use to store his instruments and supplies. They are sensitive to the mountain climate, he claimed. Khempo Rinpoche answered. Of course. It provides the most direct and logical point of origin for any acoustic apparatus. It is the path of a rational mind, observed Sherlock Holmes. His finger, however, did not stop. It moved away from the main cellar, tracing a second, much fainter line on the map. A line so faded it was nearly lost in the paper's aged texture. But what of this one? A ventilation duct, perhaps? Or a forgotten service tunnel? See where it leads, Rinpoche? Not to the main cellar, but skirting it, running parallel before turning sharply towards this secluded wing, explained Sherlock Holmes. The old abbot leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. A flicker of dismay crossed his serene features. That passage has been sealed for generations. It leads towards the meditation cells of our most devout acolytes, towards the quarters of Anila Dolma herself. But that is an impossibility. Her faith is the bedrock of this place, replied Khempo Rinpoche. In an investigation, my friend, we must discard nothing as impossible, only improbable. Let us inspect the entrance to this forgotten way, deduced Sherlock Holmes. We left the warmth of the chambers and proceeded down a long stone corridor, our footsteps making soft shuffling sounds that the walls seemed to absorb. A biting draught snaked along the floor, a constant reminder of the mountain's presence. As we rounded a corner, we came upon Nirav Singh himself, walking briskly away from the very section of wall Holmes had indicated on the map. He saw us, and his stride faltered for a fraction of a second. He gave a curt, formal nod, his face a mask of polite industry. Yet I could not help but notice the tension in his jaw before he hurried on, his boots echoing with a peculiar urgency. Holmes paid him no apparent mind, but the moment the cartographer disappeared from view, he stopped dead. His hawk-sharp eyes were fixed upon a spot on the dusty floor, just beside a loose stone at the wall's base. Curious. Very curious indeed. He stooped down, his fingers deftly plucking a small metallic object from the shadows. It was a tuning fork, much like those I had seen in Singh's surveying kit, but with a small, weighted modification to one prong. He held it up in the dim light. "Our man is cleverer than I anticipated. He feels the net closing and has laid a false trail," Sherlock Holmes said. He turned the object over in his palm, his expression one of grim admiration. "This is a tool of his trade, a signature piece. Yet he plants it here, at the entrance to a passage leading to the blameless Anila. He presents us with two paths of deceit. One implicates him through logic and access. The other implicates a holy woman through manufactured evidence. He is watching us, Watson, and he is trying to outthink me." Deduced Sherlock Holmes. A new energy seemed to fill my friend's posture. The game was truly afoot now, a duel of intellects in the heart of the Himalayas. His voice was low and sharp, cutting through the cold air. When an opponent offers you a choice of two moves, the correct response is often to make a third he cannot possibly anticipate. We shall not follow either of his paths. We shall instead set a trap that forces the true culprit to abandon his board entirely, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The air inside the oracle's chamber was thick enough to be tasted, a potent mixture of burning juniper, ancient stone, and the collective anticipation of the assembled monks. We had taken our positions, Holmes and I, near a pillar from which we had an unobstructed view of both the devout Anila, lost in her prostrations before the statue, and the cartographer, Nirav Singh, who stood with a studied reverence amongst the other lay visitors. A low, guttural chant, the very heartbeat of the monastery, provided a constant thrumming that vibrated through the soles of my boots. As the moment of prophecy approached, a hush fell. The chanting ceased, and the only sound was the sputtering of 100 butter lamps. Then, as planned, Khempo Rinpoche stepped forward, his saffron robes a splash of brilliant color in the gloom. He raised a hand, his face a mask of solemn gravity. His voice, though not loud, resonated with profound authority, carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Cease! The sacred space has been violated. A profane object has been brought into this chamber, and the spirit of the oracle is disturbed," remarked Khempo Rinpoche. The effect was instantaneous and profound. A collective gasp, sharp and fearful, swept the room, followed by a wave of agitated murmurs. Monks looked at one another with wide, alarmed eyes. The shuffling of feet on stone sounded like a sudden downpour of gravel as the assembly broke its disciplined ranks, a ripple of panic spreading outwards from the altar. My eyes, like those of my friend, were fixed upon our two subjects. In the ensuing chaos, any man guilty of placing a hidden device would surely betray himself with a glance, a twitch, a move towards the suspected location to secure his apparatus. Anila, however, merely looked up from her prayers, her face a portrait of bewildered innocent distress. She did not move, save to clutch the prayer beads at her waist. But it was Nirav Singh who truly commanded Holmes's attention. The cartographer showed a flicker of surprise, as did everyone, but it was immediately replaced by a look of concerned composure. He made no move towards the cellars, nor towards the passage leading to the nuns' quarters. Instead, he remained perfectly still, in the most public part of the chamber, his inaction a defiant display of innocence. He did not stir, nor did he even glance towards the potential locations of his device. He simply stood, a calm island in a sea of confusion. When the chamber had been cleared under Rinpoche's direction, Holmes turned to me, his lips set in a thin, grim line. The trap had been sprung, but the quarry had refused the bait. His voice was a low, intense whisper that cut through the echoing silence of the empty hall. "Did you observe, my friend?" The zealot was simply confused. The amateur would have panicked and made for his machine. But our man did neither. "Sherlock Holmes," as Sigerson answered. The old abbot joined us, his expression troubled. He did nothing. "The plan has failed, Sigerson La," answered Khempo Rinpoche. A flicker of something akin to admiration crossed Holmes's features. "On the contrary, it has succeeded brilliantly. It has told us everything we need to know. A calculated silence is more telling than a panicked confession. We are not dealing with a mere political agitator, but a highly intelligent operative who suspected a ruse and called our bluff," answered Sherlock Holmes as Sigerson. He paused, his gaze sweeping the chamber as if seeing it for the first time, his mind clearly racing ahead to a new and more dangerous course of action. He turned back to Rinpoche, his tone now sharp and decisive. He has shown his hand by refusing to play it. The time for subtlety, therefore, is at an end. The fox will not be lured from its den by shadows. "We must go to the den ourselves," said Sherlock Holmes, as Sigerson. The failure of my friend's subtle trap had left him not discouraged, but with a flinty resolve I knew all too well. "The time for snares and delicate manoeuvring was past," Holmes declared, his voice low and precise as he outlined his swift change in strategy. "Our quarry, Rinpoche, is no common brute to be frightened from his burrow. He is a fox of the highest order. He has sniffed the air, sensed the hunter, and will not break cover. Therefore, we must go in and drag him out by the scruff of his neck." Sherlock Holmes responded. The wise old Lama, Khempo Rinpoche, had simply nodded, his ancient eyes holding a deep and sorrowful understanding. A pretext was arranged with quiet efficiency. It was declared that the foundations beneath the main prayer hall required urgent inspection, a task that fell naturally to the learned European explorer and the monastery's own head. No one questioned their descent into the chill, musty depths of the main storage cellar. The great wooden door groaned on its iron hinges as they pulled it shut behind them, its heavy thud echoing in the sudden darkness before a lantern was lit. Their boots scraped softly on the stone flags, the sound swallowed by the immense silent space. The air was thick with the scent of ages, of dried herbs, yak butter, and cold stone. They moved past towering stacks of tea chests and great sacks of barley, the lantern light throwing their long shadows against the rough-hewn walls. It was then that a faint, unnatural sound reached them, a methodical, metallic scraping. Rounding a final stack of crates they found him. Nirav Singh knelt on the floor, his back to them, utterly absorbed in his work. Before him lay a curious collection of brass fittings, coiled copper wire, and a small galvanic battery. He was in the process of carefully disassembling a device that culminated in a polished brass horn, not unlike those used on the new phonographs in London. At the sound of their approach, he started violently, spinning around with a gasp. "Rinpoche! Sigerson! I was merely checking for damp. These delicate mapping instruments are so easily damaged," answered Nirav Singh. His voice was thin and unconvincing. Holmes stepped forward, the lantern light glinting in his sharp eyes. He gestured not at the man, but at the apparatus on the floor. "A fascinating instrument, Mr. Singh. One might almost mistake it for a device to measure seismic tremors. Yet the particular arrangement of this diaphragm, and the fine wiring leading not down into the earth, but upwards towards the prayer hall, it suggests a purpose more acoustic than geologic. Specifically, the transmission of sound, not the recording of it." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The cartographer's face seemed to collapse. The scholar's mask fell away, revealing the hard, weary features of a man long accustomed to danger. He rose slowly to his feet, making no move to conceal the evidence. "You are cleverer than my masters in St. Petersburg gave you credit for, Sigerson. I confess I underestimated the quiet Norwegian." "The game is up," remarked Nirav Singh. "Your true name and purpose, then?" stated Sherlock Holmes. The man's reply was cold, stripped of all pretense, the clipped tones of a military officer reporting a failed mission. Captain Nikolai Volkov, Imperial Russian Army. My mission was to ensure the treaty between this place and British India failed. A border war here would keep your Raj occupied for a decade. It would bleed your resources and halt your relentless crawl towards our frontiers, said Nirav Singh. Throughout the stark confession, Khempo Rinpoche had remained utterly still, his gaze fixed upon the man who had sought to plunge his world into chaos. Now, at last, he spoke. His voice, though soft, carried an immense weight that seemed to fill the cavernous cellar, compelling all other sound to recede. You have not merely attempted to incite war between men. You have used a sacred vessel to broadcast a profane lie. You have poisoned the well of faith from which my people drink. That is a crime far greater than any earthly treason, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. It was many months later, with the Baker Street fire crackling merrily in the grate, that Holmes finally chose to recount the extraordinary conclusion to his Tibetan sojourn. He leaned back, his long fingers steepled, and described the scene in the oracle's chamber with a clarity that transported me from our foggy London rooms to that high, cold mountain sanctuary. The air, Watson, was thick with the scent of juniper incense and an almost palpable tension. The monks had gathered, their saffron robes a sea of colour against the dark, carved wood. Their bare feet made a soft, shuffling sound on the stone flags, a whisper beneath the weight of their expectancy. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, his eyes fixed upon the dancing flames as if seeing the events unfold once more. I saw in my mind's eye the devout Anila Dolma, her face etched with a conflict of fear and faith, her gaze locked upon the impassive golden face of the statue. Then Khempo Rinpoche entered. A profound silence fell, so complete that the faint, distant chime of a wind bell from the courtyard seemed as loud as a thunderclap. He did not look at me, but addressed his people, his voice not loud, but possessed of a resonance that filled every corner of the chamber. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply, "A shadow has fallen upon this sacred place. An agent of conflict, using profane arts from the world below, sought to mimic the sacred voice. He wove a web of deceit, not to fool a machine, but to profane a holy vessel and turn our hearts to war," Khempo Rinpoche said. Holmes described how a low murmur swept through the assembled monks. It was not a sound of doubt, but of outrage and affirmation. By framing Singh's deception as a spiritual desecration rather than a mere mechanical trick, Rinpoche had preserved the sanctity of the oracle itself. He had given them an enemy to despise, not a belief to discard. It was masterful, Watson. He allowed their faith to become a shield. He then raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent once more. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The profane echo is silenced. The vessel is cleansed, and in the stillness, a final, true wisdom has been imparted to guide us. Heed it well, said Khempo Rinpoche. Then, in that same calm, resonant voice, the old Lama delivered the words that Holmes himself had so carefully constructed the night before. The mountain stands not by resisting the wind, but by being one with the stone. Let the hand offered from the south be a bridge, not a blade. True strength is the peace that allows the grain to grow. Embrace the treaty, said Khempo Rinpoche. A sharp collective intake of breath was the only sound. It filled the chamber. Holmes told me he watched Anila Dolma's face. The tension dissolved, replaced by a look of serene understanding. Her faith had not been shattered. It had been tested and affirmed. She bowed her head, and as one, the entire assembly followed her lead. The treaty was secure. The agent was removed without fanfare, his disgrace a quiet matter for the Lama to handle. But the true victory was that not a single soul in that monastery felt their world had been rendered false. It had, in fact, been made stronger, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes fell silent then, leaving me to contemplate the profound difference between a truth that dissects and a truth that heals. The matter was concluded, the great game having been won not with a checkmate, but with a quiet act of wisdom that ensured the board itself would remain for future play. I could sense that his time in that remote fastness was drawing to its predestined close. The fire in our Baker Street hearth had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows upon the walls. Holmes had been speaking for the better part of an hour, his voice a low and steady current as he recounted the final act of his extraordinary Tibetan venture. He paused, long fingers steepled before him, his gaze fixed upon the embers, as if seeing in them the snow-capped peaks he had left behind. He continued his tale, describing the morning of his departure. A wind, sharp and clean with the promise of more snow, swept down from the high passes, setting the prayer flags at the monastery gate into a frantic, whispering chorus. The great wooden doors, bound with iron, groaned against the gust as they were opened for him. Khempo Rinpoche stood there alone, his saffron robes a splash of defiant warmth against the grey stone and the pale, unforgiving sky. His voice, I noted, had taken on a softer, more reverent tone. He did not offer his hand, but bowed in the fashion of his people. I returned the gesture. "He was the first to speak," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes then relayed the old abbot's words, which carried none of the wind's chill. "You came to us as Sigerson, the explorer. But you leave as something more, my friend. You found a crack in our faith, and, instead of shattering the vessel, you sealed it, making it stronger than before. That is a rare art," Khempo Rinpoche said. Holmes told me he merely shrugged, his pack heavy on his shoulders. "It was a simple matter of acoustics and political ambition, Rinpoche. Once I identified the resonant frequency of the chamber and traced the wires, the deception was laid bare. Singh's motive was elementary," replied Sherlock Holmes. The old man had offered a gentle smile at this, a smile that Holmes confessed had unsettled his own certainty more than any cross-examination. "Many men possess logic. It is a sharp tool and useful for cutting knots. But you chose not to cut. You saw that the knot was woven into the heart of my people. Instead, you used wisdom to gently unpick the thread of deceit, leaving the core of their belief untouched. The cleverest trap is worthless if, in springing it, you destroy the garden it was meant to protect. That is the difference between a keen mind and a wise one," Khempo Rinpoche answered. At this, Holmes fell silent in our sitting room. The only sound was the soft hiss and pop of the coals. I understood then that this was the very crux of the lesson he had carried back from the roof of the world. It was not merely the solution to the puzzle that had marked him, but the profound nature of the solution he had been guided to choose. He described their final parting. The Rinpoche had said nothing more, merely gesturing to the path that led down the mountain. As Holmes began his descent, the rhythmic clang of a distant monastery gong echoed up the valley, a sound of profound and resonant peace. He did not look back. His gaze lifted from the fire to meet mine, and I saw the familiar, sharp light in his eyes was tempered by a new depth. "Facts, Watson, are the foundation of all truth. But I learnt there that the truth which governs the human heart is not always built of stone and mortar alone. Sometimes it is held together by faith, and to chip away at its foundation for the sake of mere intellectual vanity is the greatest folly of all," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He rose and picked up his violin. As the first mournful, introspective notes filled the quiet room, I knew that the explorer Sigerson was truly gone, but that Sherlock Holmes had returned from his great hiatus not merely alive, but in some essential way, more complete.